Welcome to our what we're calling Vermont Research Live Wednesdays or Research Live Wednesdays. So every Wednesday at noon, we hope to sit down with somebody in Vermont who's doing really interesting things in the original workspace. Could be research, could be art, could be music, something creative, original that somehow leverages off this laboratory of Vermont. And today, we're going to talk to Steve Perkins, who's the director of the Vermont Historical Society. And they have a number of really interesting projects going on that relate to this present moment in time and how the society itself has pivoted to reflect what's happening around us. So I'd like to introduce and welcome Steve Perkins to Vermont Research Live. And we're
Here we are.
Steve. Thank you for joining us. And I should say we're trying a new platform here and we're all hopeful that it's going to work. But Steve and I are going to talk about some things for 15 minutes or so, and then we hope to open it up for any questions or points that people would like to raise. So again, welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me, Richard. And, just that kind of warning, like most people in Vermont, we're all working from home. And my wife is a teacher. She's teaching online. And I have two teenagers who are taking online classes as well. So our bandwidth sometimes is a little sketchy here.
And before we start on what we're going to dive into, everybody's doing okay. I mean, this is quite a moment in time. I'm in my house in Heinsberg and I'm teaching online in my classes, but family is doing okay. And you guys?
Everyone's doing well, as much as we can. Interesting trying to figure out how school happens from home and running a historical society with employees all over the place. And we're all working from home as well.
No, I just can't imagine. So let's start a little bit, Steve. Talk a bit about what the Vermont Historical Society is and what you do.
Absolutely. So the Vermont Historical Society has been around since 1838. So we're a very old organization. And really our main charge is to collect, preserve, and, inspire those stories about Vermont in every way that we can. We started off as a research library in the early 19th century and soon started collecting objects by the middle of the 19th century. So we've always had a museum in Montpelier. We now have a facility in Barrie as well with a research library and collection. So researchers use our material. We work closely with schools on curriculum development and programs. And then we also collect and amplify those stories that people are telling, whether it's traditional publishing or through new online platforms that we're going to explore some today.
Before we talk more about the substance of some of what you're doing right now, how does an organization like yours, an important cultural institution in Vermont that really is known in many things, but among others for doing events? I know you had a Third Thursday program, you have Vermont History Day. Just talk a little bit about how you've pivoted in this moment, and then let's dive into some of the stuff you're doing.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. So for the past 2 years, we've been working with a new strategic plan that's been asking a lot of questions of how do we reach Vermonters, both throughout the state, but also people who have an affinity for Vermont who live around the world. And the answer is online. So we've started to put a structure in place so we could do a lot of our activities in this online arena. But, as most kind of old legacy organizations are, the ramp up to that has necessarily been slow. The crisis now has forced us to move much more quickly in approaching these online venues than we had in the past. So from a very easy standpoint, lectures that would normally take place in a classroom, say at UVM or in one of our classrooms in Montpelier or Barrie, is now presented online. And that went very successfully the first time we did that. And then even getting creative about taking things like our pub trivia program. So our programs manager, Amanda Gustin, has traveled around the state doing trivia programs at bars and pubs. It's been a lot of fun talking about Vermont history. That's now an online event. We're doing it every Wednesday night. So it's actually tonight. Via Facebook Live, and you can participate live and test your knowledge. But taking those things that are place-based, moving them to an online venue. I think History Day was one of the hardest ones, both kind of emotionally for us, and then trying to figure out the logistics. As you know, Richard, it's one of the biggest events that we do each year, with thousands of kids and their families descending on UVM to show exhibits and lectures and websites and documentaries and all sorts of great research these kids have done for the whole year. And that all happens together in one place. And it's great to bring all those students from all over Vermont together. We can't do that this year. So we're doing a virtual competition, and everything is submitted online. Judges judge it online, and we'll have a virtual award ceremony at the beginning of May. That just doesn't quite feel the same as doing it in person. So I think that was hard. We're doing it. I don't foresee us doing an online version of that in the future, because it is so important to get those students together in one place.
Yeah, I've participated, got to sit in on one of those, and just the energy, as you have told me before going in and then being there, of 800, 1,000 students and their parents in one room talking about history and showing off. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I could see how that one is going to be difficult to think about online. Whereas another one you told me about was a public lecture, which might have had 40 or 50 people there, and you might have had as many as 1,000 people on Facebook Live.
We did. That was our last third Thursday lecture on kind of the women's suffrage movement in Vermont and all of the research that's happening and celebrations happening this year. Our third Thursday program has traditionally been an in-person lecture program with a online kind of add-on. If you can't make it in person, watch it online. When we went completely online, the viewers of that went through the roof. So over 1,000 unique viewers on that live broadcast, and that was exactly a month ago, from tomorrow, I guess. So it leads us to be thinking as an organization, what are some of these things that we do in person that maybe only a few people attend? We let go of that in person. And even once we get back to normal here, we pivot to doing more of those events in an online manner.
Yeah. Okay, so just a reminder for those watching, this is Richard Watts with the Center for Research in Vermont. I'm talking with Steve Perkins, who's the director of the Vermont Historical Society, about how they're pivoting in this amazing time. And also now, let's talk a little bit about some of the projects that you have underway, Steve. One, that dives a little deeper into this pandemic story, I believe.
Yeah, so we released yesterday some press and went live. So we're very topical on this. We've created an online collecting tool so that we can document what's happening right now during this pandemic. We all live in such a technological world. We're doing this on Facebook Live. And I think so many people are documenting their lives, whether they're using Instagram or Facebook or some other kind of social media, but forgetting that that's a very transient media. And perhaps in as little as, a year, all of those images and those remembrances and those thoughts and those feelings may be gone. So how do we capture some of what's going on in our world right now and cataloging it within the archives of the Vermont Historical Society?
So let's take a minute maybe and look at, is there something on your webpage we should look at?
Yeah, if you just go right to our homepage, which is vermonthistory.org, there's lots of links on that page. Obviously, there's the first one, temporarily closed. If you scroll down, you'll see a link here. Keep going, and we'll see a link that says COVID-19 archive. And that links to a project that we call Digital Vermont, which is a way for us to gather materials from all over the state and properly catalog them. And when I say catalog them, that means that we're archiving those for use by people, whether it's 20 years down the road to 50 years to 100 years down the road, in the same way you'd use a paper archive. So this is very different than, say, posting something to Facebook. And so this is completely crowdsourced, and you may add items to this. We're asking folks to upload images, poems, writings, journals, video, whatever makes sense to you as the user. And like I said, we just dropped this yesterday, and I think at last count was well over 60, perhaps even 70 submissions right now. And I've been paging through them as they've been coming in, and I can see as you're scrolling through, these even are more, new items that I haven't seen here. I see Tunbridge quarantine, some great signs. The COVID Easter is a great image that was uploaded by a photographer from Plattsburgh, New York, thinking about what does this look like at this time. So you can see as you page through, the file has been uploaded. As a researcher, you can look at it, title, description, creator, date, contributor, collection, citation. So all of this stuff goes into this academic archive that we foresee researchers using well into the future. I think it's very easy to upload things. Richard, you can just click on a link and just follow those instructions. And I think people have been having a good time doing that. In addition to this, we did use the same platform to upload some of our items from the 1918 pandemic, which I think a lot of people have been talking about these days in relating Vermont's experience in 1918 to Vermont's experience today. And that's a great example of, what an archive from over 100 years ago looks like.
So the piece that you were just showing us, it's on your page, and of course we'll put a link here, but this really seems like one way that public scholarship, public institutions like yours that are trying to preserve something are going, where you use the word crowdsource. So in a way, people are putting in their historical stories and photos, and then you're providing the kind of citation. So a researcher could a researcher even give you the types of things they were looking for, or they would look through this using search words? Or
Yep. They would be able to go onto the archive and search it right through the catalog in the same way that they would use the catalog to our library collection. And it's built on an open source program for those who are geeking out about this sort of thing called Omeka, which is an open source library program. And this gathering tool, which allows us to archive it, was developed at the University of Virginia when they were documenting the kind of the culture that came out of the Unite the Right March a couple of years ago. That was so controversial, and it has since been used in Wisconsin as well for a COVID-19 collection. So we're working with these other historical societies and universities with this technology, which also means it's all compatible and the data is portable. It's not proprietary. I think that's very important to researchers who are working on this now and in the future.
Slight detour here, but you've heard this concept where we all have historical materials in our households. A lot of them in the past have ended up like people would bring them to you, right?
Yeah.
But maybe there's something down in this milieu now where we share these historical items that we have, but they're available through online portals like this.
This has been a conversation with museums and historical societies really for the past 10, 15 years. When you have a video chat with somebody, or you write them a quick text message or even an email, what are you doing with that after you've had that communication? It's very different than going into your attic and discovering a trunk full of letters between grandma and grandpa. That's a tangible thing. And often those end up in archives like ours. And they're a very rich source of telling us what life was like. At the time that they were written, it humanizes history. It's not just those facts and figures. What are we saving from right now? So much of this data that enriches our lives. Those pictures of our dogs and our cats and what we did during this quarantine time. How much of that are we saving, and how much can be used 100 years from now, just like we use these letters from 100 years ago? And I'd argue it's much harder. It's much harder to document and save this experience when it's all in a digital realm than when we were purely analog. You wrote it down on paper. That paper survived.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also so much, right? So it's overwhelming the material people bring you that are physical artifacts, but today there's just so much.
We'll see what we get via this tool. I mean, the nice thing is that digital storage is inexpensive at this point in our world history. So we have the ability to take it in. And what's nice with this platform is it's cataloged as it comes in rather than just getting emailed to us and we then have to catalog it. That's a lot of man hours. So that's what we really like about this tool.
All right, let's talk for a minute about, you mentioned the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu, what you know about it and what you've collected on that or thinking about it.
Yeah, so if you go to the same place on our website, the COVID-19 link to Digital Vermont, um, there should be another link to the 1918. I think if you scroll up, um, just scroll up there to the top of that. See the 1918 influenza tab? So click on that. That's the same. So this is what happens as people upload items that we're able to make it look a little prettier here. But really, all this is it's putting a pretty face on a bunch of collections that we have. And Marjorie Strong, one of our librarians, has been working really hard over the past couple of weeks to pull images and documents that we have related to the 1918 influenza outbreak. Certainly, pictures are something that are going to jump out at you, but that Dorman Kent influenza diary, which was just cited in an article in Smithsonian Magazine that came out earlier in the week. So this is I believe this one is a transcript. So researchers, we do have real images of the diary as well, but this is a transcript. And lots and lots of diaries. This was a great diarist in Montpelier, but he contracted influenza and he wrote about his feelings having that influenza. So I don't know if you can make that bigger. I can't read it on my screen. From memory, I can probably say he wrote up. So what you see right there is a description of him himself, and then you can roll down and see some of the transcriptions of some of those diaries. So that's Tuesday, September 17th. If you go to September 18th, was the day he was, I think it was the 18th he was sick. Oh, there we go. Now we have the whole thing. We said this is new technology. We're going through this stuff live. So if you roll down, I guess it wasn't the 18th, 20 something maybe. He was sick. He had influenza, and he wrote about that. Keep going here. Here we go. Tuesday, September 24th, 1918. Awoke at 7, sick, sick, sick. Didn't get up or try to. Had a high fever, an awful headache every minute all day, and was sick to my stomach also. Tried to get Dr. Watson in the morning, but he couldn't come and told us instead what to do. Greased cloth with inflammasine all day. And that's like a warming compound, almost like Vicks VapoRub, and put it around throat and chest and held a bottle of hot water at throat most of the time. Took Sedlitz powder, threw it up, and he goes on about what it was. He had he didn't he wasn't sick for long. He was better kind of in a couple of days, but he ended up going door to door as part of the town or city health response, trying to figure out how many people are sick and how many people died. And so he later on in his diary, he talks about going door to door, counting the number of people who are sick. He talks about the schools being closed. So, I mean, this is very personal. This is talking about what's happened with this influenza at the time, and it's kind of the rich stuff that you can find at the Vermont Historical Society. Also within this collection that we've just put up online are broadsides with public health information on how to take care of yourself during influenza, data sheets put out by the Vermont Department of Health. I don't think it was called Department of Health at the time, about how much that the influenza impacted the state. So it was a tough time for our state in 1918. We don't hear a lot about it, or haven't until this point in our history. I think it was really overshadowed by World War I. And of course, World War I ended on November 11th, 1918. And so the idea of this influenza epidemic or pandemic went out of the news pretty quickly, even though hundreds of thousands of people died and millions were infected.
That's amazing, Steve. I mean, that you have this historical record of 1918 and you're creating that record as we speak about what's happening around us today.
And I hope we can get some researchers who will use both and maybe create some really cool stuff, I think.
Somebody asked, what's your favorite part of your job? I kind of think you may have just given it to us, but what do you love about this work? Why do you do it?
Gosh, there's so many things I love about this work. But I think understanding different people's stories, talking about their own experiences in the past, and then how that informs us today. I just kind of keep bouncing back and forth, past to present, reading those diaries and then relating to them to what's going on today. Richard, I've told you in the past, I've got this little side project where I'm working with these diaries of a family, the Hunt family of Brattleboro, Vermont, from the early 19th century, and who went to Europe, and the family became artists and architects and everything else. But just 2 days ago, I was transcribing some letters, and I found a letter from one of the sisters writing to another sister. Her son had died of tuberculosis, and it was a whole letter describing that day. And it really humanized, what happened. And it could be happening today. It could be somebody describing what was going on with their loved ones. And I think that really hit me. So I think this work is important, and I think it's very interesting. And, I can go up to that library and for looking for something that's supposed to take me a minute, and 2 hours later emerge and not knowing where the time went.
It's funny, when I was doing research at the university for my studies, we would be in these carols, like you would go look up a book, but then next to the book would be all the books that were related to it. And I feel like people miss that a little bit now. When you get something online, you just get that. But you could spend, like, as you said, hours and hours, because all the other books that had something to do with that book or subject or title were all there in that one place.
And that absolutely happens to me all the time. And I think there's some great articles about that happening too within research collections. We all get very excited about digitizing things like, say, the Kent Diary. But if you were to come and use the Kent Diary within the research setting, you would notice that it's in a box with a whole bunch of other papers as well. So yes, you can read that diary online. But if you're really interested in that family and other things that he had to say, it's also in that box, and you're not going to get it kind of picking and choosing through the digitized items.
So just a couple minutes left, Steve, but is there anything about your work in Vermont, or, you are the director of the Historical Society of Vermont. Is there anything about this work that makes it more accessible in Vermont, or I don't know?
Yeah, Vermont's an interesting state. We're really small, and I spend a lot of my time driving all over the state. But some things are inaccessible, and folks don't always make it to Montpelier or Barrie. So how do we provide all of these resources to people throughout the state? And right now, more than ever, also on our main website, vermonthistory.org, there's a big banner right across the top, and it says, online resources to use from home. And there's a long list of things that people can engage with, things that they can participate in or just consume, whether it's podcasts, whether it's videos, articles to read. We've opened up a whole bunch of our Vermont history journals for folks to read online at home. We have lots of activities for kids. We have an online portal for teachers and students called Vermont History Explorer. That's linked off of that page as well. And that has, I don't think I'm blowing this up if I'm saying thousand pages of material on Vermont history that's all written at the kind of 4th and 5th grade accessibility level, with links to primary sources, activities. So no matter what topic you're looking for, that is available. Right now we're working on that particular website and modernizing it, because the site was created a little over 10 years ago. But all the content on there is still great and is used by teachers and students on a regular basis. And I'm hoping now more than ever, the public can access that and use that resource.
Oh, well, that's really nice. And it's just what we've been trying now here to do at the Center for Research in Vermont, to make the work of people like Steve Perkins and the Historical Society as accessible or known about as possible. So thank you, Steve, for joining us for our inaugural Vermont Research Online Wednesdays. Next week, we hope to talk to Susan McClure of the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, see what they're doing to make their work as accessible as possible. So again, Vermont Historical Society will make sure the links are posted on our website. And thanks for all you do for keeping Vermont, whatever we are, accessible and knowable, and presenting all this stuff in all the ways you do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Richard. And I'm glad that we stayed online here and didn't get bumped off. So it's a wonderful thing.
Hope to see you in person again. Last time I saw Steve was in Ohio. He invited us to talk about Vermont. All right. Goodbye. Thank you all for joining us.